Hi everyone, my project is how has the military conflict impacted Ukraine's cultural heritage? So for my introduction, I decided that I wanted to share a few pictures that were recently published in the National Public Radio article that were pertaining to tangible and intangible parts of cultural heritage, but at the same time to explain more in depth about the folklore from Ukraine. So for centuries, countries have collected and kept records of their cultural heritage through traditional forms of expression. But when looking at Ukraine, the culture and values of the Ukrainian community, they're literally being expressed through various forms of traditional cultural expressions. When reading and researching about Ukraine, I noticed that they had their cultural expressions through a wealth amount of things, such as wood carvings, ceramics, embroidery, folk art, architectural monuments, and museums. And currently, when it comes to the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, also known as, I've been pronouncing it, UNESCO, they currently have 8 properties registered. But due to the amount of information that they have, I also wanted to just highlight with you all about the impacts of cultural significance. So I looked at the University of Kansas definition pertaining to culture and when it comes to our environment. And what I noticed was that culture can play a significant role within our society, pretty much in the same way when we think about it in a science realm. Like in the science realm, we think about cells and organisms. I think of the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse. And so when it comes to culture, it becomes the powerhouse for a community to be able to grow and evolutionize itself in a way that individuals are able to shape, view, and create values and hopes and loyalty within a community and within their own dynamic. Having that mindset, I want you all to think about when it comes to military conflict. Now, dealing with military conflict, what I've noticed is that the term means that there's active engagement of armed forces in a hostile situation, whether it is in a nation or within groups within a nation. So this can be also something that's like a civil war, which is something that I think we're all privy to from other forms of history. When it comes to dealing with this particular case of Ukraine back in February of 2022, they were invaded by Russia. And since the invasion, it has caused a major eruption within their communities across the different regions of Ukraine. But at the same time, when it comes to their cultural heritage, UNESCO has reported as of November 26 that 512 cultural sites have been physically damaged. This includes 152 religious sites, 268 buildings of historical and artistic interest, 37 museums, 33 monuments, 18 libraries, 3 archaeological sites, and 1 archive. Now, having that in mind, it sounds egregious because it is. Dealing with that type of loss in a community, it can cause literally a decline in an understanding of identity, but a decline in history as well. And it's going to take several generations before it can be fully restored to somewhat of its full capacity. Now, dealing with military conflict, this leads us into something else. With dealing with military conflict, what I've noticed is that it can change the dynamic of what is considered tangible and intangible for culture. Meaning, what is it that's most important that we must protect against war crime against humanity? Because this is a war crime against humanity. So for my next slide here, as you can see, when it comes to dealing with tangible cultural heritage, Ukraine has a rich background in this. So there were several different things that I noticed, like the wool coat, the embroidery on Mrs. Hannah's um, blouse, and with the castle and called Saint Michaelis. And when it comes to it, I've noticed that in these particular tangible items and places, there are monuments and sites. These were areas in which their royalty within their community actually lived and owned in. And this country is not naive or oblivious to dealing with wreckage from military conflict. When researching about Ukraine's history, I noticed that when it came to the Soviet war, that the castle actually was invaded by the Soviet troops and turned into a stable for their horses. Due to the neglect and the time of when it was first, created during the 14th century, a lot of work in restoring its original estate has been a major project for the last 25 years. This leads me into our intangible cultural heritage and how it's also being impacted as well. So, dealing with the fact that the immobile, tangible cultural institution, the castle in reference, when it came to the National Public Radio, they were able to record and take imagery of a folk choir recording a music video while performing and wearing historically accurate clothing and following dance routines. Now, dealing with these dance routines, that is considered intangible because it is labeled as a performing art. It's not something we can physically grasp our hands on. However, when it comes to future generations due to war conflict, if there is no recording or documentation of these actual dances, it impacts future generations from learning and understanding pretty much their history through a performing arts perception and perspective. Now, dealing with LAMs, also known as library, archives, museums, monuments, and sites, to preserve this form of art is something that they are known for doing. It helps for future generations to be able to have a full understanding. For an example, if you all are familiar with Bridgerton, a lot of the dances that we see in a lot of the dance scenes that are in Bridgerton, a lot of that information about the dancing and performing arts that take place during those scenes is information that we have collected over the years and has been preserved for us to be able to have a better understanding as how these dances were created as a source of entertainment, but also a source of intimacy with a potential partner. But to get back to our point here, when it came to the second form of intangible cultural heritage in Ukraine, another was the museum theater called Hutzul. Due to ongoing military conflict with Russia right now, their productions have significantly been reduced to the number of shows and rehearsals that they can be able to have on a regular, constant base due to recent reports of bombings and, unfortunately, more military conflict. In conclusion, I decided to give you all a brief summary given by the British Institute of International and Comparative Law when it came to Article 8, Section 2, B, quote 9. It discusses the social and cultural rights for when a war crime has been or is currently being committed against a nation's humanitarian rights. So pertaining to Russia and to Ukraine's situation currently, because it is an ongoing war at this time, this is something that is considered to be an international criminal court case. Ukraine is currently facing war against a country that is causing them to have to take drastic measures in protecting their community, but also their cultural heritage due to a political agenda. With that being said, the amount of attacks that are being made. This can lead us to literally say that military conflict is not only impactful in that moment, but it's also something that's impactful for long-term situations. The devastation that Ukraine has experienced from 2022 up till now, which it's been 3 years, it's going to take years, maybe decades, to be able to fully restore at least half of what they have lost. I would like to thank you all for taking this time to listen to my presentation, and I can't wait to hear and receive any of your feedback at this time.